Hey everybody, welcome back to another video on this channel, and today we have a look into dynamic pre-rendering. If you never heard of it, it's basically SSR for a certain group of your users, for example, crawlers. So let's talk about the how, what, why, should we use it, and how to implement it. Let's go. In one of my last videos, I was showing you how to build a plain old SPA without server-side rendering in Nuxt.js. And then some people were like, okay, we can build SPAs, we can use SSR. Can we also set it up so it only works for bots and the users will get a plain SPA? That's more or less dynamic rendering in a nutshell. But let's have a look at the infographic and see how that actually works. At first, of course, the client comes, which sends a request to your server. That also doesn't matter which framework you use, that's always the same, right? In this case, the client can be a browser or maybe also a crawler. So if it is a crawler, well, then we have two ways to go. We can either say, okay, no, it's not a crawler, it's fine, it's a typical user. And then we maybe want to send back a plain SPA. So we have a loading spinner, we have a blank HTML file, accept the loading spinner, and the JavaScript that will be sent will be executed and it generates the HTML. So far, so good. But what's with the yes part? Well, with the yes part, we want to ensure that the SEO is good, so the search engines can actually index our pages, the preview links are shown correctly, and so on and so on. So in this case, we don't want to send an SPA. Actually, we want to server render our application, so we need a renderer. Means we have to send it either to a part of our framework, of a code that we use, or maybe to an extra service, like Rendertron, which was a thing, and it's deprecated by now, but I know still some people use it to render all kinds of pages to do exactly that. And the renderer then makes sure that the whole page is server rendered, so you really have all the server-side benefits with HTML, with content, so actually with your data, and then the JavaScript for the single page application. So this is the second path the whole thing can take. And that's more or less what dynamic rendering is. So basically we differentiate between user groups and say, okay, for the one, let's send an SPA, otherwise we do SSR. So far so good. But now you might wonder, okay, people requested that, people did that. And I've also recently been to a talk where someone said, hey, this was our solution to deal with some issues. But the big question is, why? Well, some advantages is, first of all, server-side rendering in general can be very expensive. Every initial request of the user, every hard reload will go to the server. So that's cost on your end, right? And also for the client, it's a bit more CPU power because you have the whole hydration process. What I talked, for example, about in Vue.js Amsterdam and Vue.conf.js, links to the talks in the description. So where you have to go and match the server-send HTML with the thing that your application builds and then make sure it works together. So in these two ways, SSR can be expensive. The question is, can we change that? Well, with dynamic rendering, we can, because then only the crawlers will have the expensive operations because they need to and the user doesn't necessarily need to. Another point is that maybe some search engines you target, they might not understand all the JS you write. Well, now most of the popular search engines like Google, Bing, Yahoo, and so on, haven't used Yahoo in a while, by the way. Anyway, they all understand JavaScript up to the latest standard. So that should be fine, right? Especially, well, as I said, the popular ones. But sometimes it's like, okay, I have either some features, like, for example, WebSockets that the search engines don't allow and don't use. So I maybe want to render it on a server and show something. Who knows? So there are maybe cases. Or you have a target because your user group using a totally weird search engine, then that might also be a good scenario for the dynamic rendering. But the last part, and that's pretty interesting, is, well, server-side rendering adds complexity, right? Always, because you have now all pages could be rendered on the server or only on the client, because after the initial request, we have our SPA again. So that's something you maybe want to avoid, or let's say you want to bridge the gap to get there from plain SPA to at least have a little bit of SEO to ideal SEO. And to bridge the gap, dynamic pre-rendering might be a good idea because you can say, okay, I do this only for the crawlers. I don't have to bother about like, what if my user is authenticated, because crawlers are never, right? So that's one point. And last but not least, you can apply it granularly. You can start with maybe one page or two pages or a certain type of page and then go further or say, okay, I only need it for these parts. And the idea is, of course, to get your SEO in a good shape. But what about the disadvantages? Let's start with the fact that server-side rendering can actually improve user experience. While, well, if you have a plain SPA, you have a loading spinner, you have to wait, all the requests will be done on your client. So it also depends a lot on how good your reception is, right? Of course, if you're at home and have fiber, all fine. But if you're a mobile user and you're maybe in public transport, it might not be this easy. Or if you're in Germany, because, well, our reception is meh. Nevertheless, what it means is if the data is gathered on the server and maybe cached, so you don't even have to do API calls and wait maybe for some third-party APIs, and also reduced to only the amount you need, well, then that's pretty ideal. So you could say that you get results faster than just with an SPA. That's, I think, one important point, that SSR can improve UX if you use all the nice benefits of the whole caching part, right? Besides that, well, we said that dynamic rendering is adding a bit of complexity. The problem is it also has a downside that it's only a bit, because now you have to check if your page works for the user and for the crawler. I mean, if you have only SSR everywhere, or for the users as well, in certain pages, then you notice pretty quickly if something doesn't work. Users would complain, you would get error logs, and so on and so on. If it's only for the crawler, you would have to manually test that or somehow incorporate it in your CI/CD to make sure that it also works for the Googlebot and so on. But that's a bit trickier than just saying, okay, we check it for all users. So that's a trade-off you would have to make, right? And last but not least, I think that's the biggest disadvantage. It is defined as a workaround. It's really not meant to stay like that forever. It's more from transitioning to a JavaScript-heavy single-page application that needs good SEO over here to SSR for the pages that need SEO. So it should really be an intermediate step only. And there's another issue, because Google a couple of years already deprecated the whole thing, said it was a workaround, not it is a workaround. Mainly indicating that this shouldn't be a way people should take for long, right? Maybe not at all even. But once again, that depends on your needs. And while we're at that, Google has another thing, and people were sometimes wondering about the cloaking topic. So when you're not into SEO, there are certain things you shouldn't do, right? Like stuff all the keywords in the text saying 100 times, I know, Nuxt is the most amazing framework, the most amazing framework, Nuxt, la 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 la. That's really not good. It worked like years ago, like 10, 15 years. But nowadays, that doesn't do anything. It's really easy to spot. And another thing of these is cloaking, which means you send Google and crawlers in general different content, so the site appears to be more, well, with more text, with more keywords, and so on, or you just omit something you show to the user just to make it more appealing to the search engine. And of course, it's not allowed. You could get a penalty for that. Maybe your site is restricted from being shown the search result pages at all. You don't want that. So the question is dynamic rendering cloaking? And the answer is no, it's not, unless you really tamper with the results. So as long as you don't send the crawler something else than the user would see, ignoring the loading spinner and all, then you're good. If the content is more or less the same, it's all fine, but don't start adding some things in there, because that would be a problem. So now that we know a bit more about it, the question is, should you use it? My advice, I would always try to go full server-side rendering or static site generation first for the page that need it. And only if you see, yeah, you know, we somehow hit some issues, like the pages loads forever, then maybe that's an option. Say, okay, you know what, until we fix it, we at least have a little bit of SEO that works, then nothing. Because SPAs are in general not really SEO friendly. So if you really need it, you can try it, but otherwise, I would just go straight away for SSR or SSG. Nevertheless, let's have a look how to implement it. The thing is, it really depends on the framework you use, on the setup, but in our case, we will use Nuxt.js and see how easy is that to implement in just a couple of lines. This demo application here, maybe some people will recognize that it is from the Nuxt SPA video. So we have a few things here, our Nuxt config and some pages to show like a dynamic page and some about an index. The first thing we'll do is we remove the hash mode because, well, for good SEO, we don't want to have hash URLs. And also we want to enable SSR by default and then only disable it if it's an actual user, and if it's a crawler, well, then we keep it on. For the hook here, well, that doesn't really matter. In our case, we can leave it here or not, that's fine. Now, the most important part here, what we want to do is we want to add a new server middleware. So let's add a new server middleware called, I don't know, SEO bot.ts. So we say before the request hits Nuxt, we want to set a few things. And now is the question what we will set here. Our idea is to check, is the request from a crawler? And if yes, then do nothing, because by default, the crawler should get SSR. And otherwise, well, disable SSR. So how do we do that here? Well, we start very simple. Crawlers, it's tricky. We can't 100% identify them, but the easiest way would be the user agent. And the good thing is there is a crawler regex available on the internet. So we just set it up here saying, okay, all the Googlebot things, Twitterbot, and so on and so on. So we use the whole long regex here. And we only want to define it once outside of that function because it is static, it is the same, and that gives us a little performance benefit. Now, let's get the header actually from the event, the user agent header. So let's say const user agent is, we use get header here and say, okay, let's get it from the user agent from the event, or if it's not set for whatever reason, the default is just an empty string. So far, so good. And now we have to say const is crawler. And is crawler is basically nothing else than taking the regex and say, okay, let's test it based on the user agent and see if it matches any of these or not. Good. So if that's the case, so if there is a crawler detected, then we do nothing. We return here, early return to say, okay, all good, it's all fine. And otherwise, well, we want to disable server-side rendering. But the question is how we do it. And luckily, there was someone writing a blog post about it a couple of months ago, I think. So let's go back to the browser and have a really quick look what it is about. And yes, that one was me back in September even, was at least the update. So let's jump straight away to a custom Nitro middleware, because there are lots of ways to do that in Nuxt, but we want exactly this. We want to say, okay, we have certain condition here in our Nitro middleware, and otherwise we set the Nuxt context. If it's set, we use that, otherwise an empty object. And then we say, we set no SSR to true. So these two lines are saving us the day here. Let's take them and go back to our code. And in our code, we just copied it over. We say, okay, we set the Nuxt context here, and then we set no SSR true, and that's it already. So really, this is the whole magic behind it, nothing else. Of course, you can change the condition to whatever you want. You can say, hey, do it only for Googlebot or whatever you prefer, right? But let's see if it works. Let's check if we did it right. To test it, we want to open our localhost 3000. And the best part is we can straight away take a look if it's server rendered or not. We already saw flickering, so that's a very good indicator that it's not server rendered as we want because we're just a normal user. But to make sure, and I also have shown it in another video to check which content on your page is server rendered or not, link in the description. What you can do is you can just check the view page source tab, and there you can see, okay, this is nothing, like no index page, for example, will be found here because we have the script text straight away. There's nothing in there. The whole thing is pretty much empty. Okay, that's how we want it. So how do we test now if we can actually access it as a crawler and it will work? Well, the solution is we should just change our user agent header. And luckily there are tons of extensions to do that. I will quickly fire on my Firefox extension to do that. And well, now have a look. In the user agent switcher add-on, you can just set your user agent, for example, to Googlebot. So that's what we did. And let's refresh the whole thing and take a look once again. So now the whole thing should be server rendered. That seemed fine. I did a hard refresh here, no flickering, but to double check, we check the view page source, which will also be a new request. And here we see it, the little word index page, which indicates that the content itself is there. Also, of course, we have, I think another server rendered attribute here, which is number 8, and number 8 should just be true. Here we go. Perfect. So very simple. We managed to get our Nuxt application server-side rendered for the crawler and not for the users. Is this what you always want? As I mentioned earlier, not necessarily, but if there's a scenario where it makes sense to just bridge the gap and maybe go to full SSR or SSG, it's better than nothing. So now you know what dynamic rendering in 2024 is, how it works, that it's deprecated, that you probably shouldn't use it unless you have a very good reason to. And if you have one, please let me know in the comments. I'm super curious and stoked if you have one. Like, oh yeah, that's it. Alex, how could you forget that? So please let me know. And besides that, yeah, enjoy the other videos all about Nuxt, Vue, JavaScript, TypeScript on the channel. Stay tuned for next one. Of course, check out the latest Deja Vu episode. Super interesting. I tell you, it's about Vue.js. Someone built an amazing game with it. Maybe some of you don't even play it. Take a look. Definitely worth watching. And besides that, of course, stay tuned. See you soon and happy hacking.